We have seen the first 3 Resident Evil games remade in the last 18 years, with the first one being remastered for later generations of console as well, not including the retelling of events in Umbrella and Darkside Chronicles, and from a different perspective in Operation Raccoon City. Since Resident Evil 3 has been remade, there has been talk of when will Resident Evil 4 be remade as well. But another game that fans like myself feel deserves a remake too is Code Veronica, and another that has been left to the wayside has been Outbreak Files 1 and 2. So we're going to look through and see which of these games is most in need of the remake treatment. Now, a couple of caveats before I begin. Capcom will have most likely already decided in advance which should be done first, and this is just my take on how I feel it should be done. Also, I do like all 4 games, and this is going to be as objective as possible. Also, before we continue, please do remember to subscribe and ring the bell to stay notified of new Resident Evil content. All 4 games have their merits, and all 4 are ripe for a new look with the power of the R.E.T.I.N.A engine. But debate is still ongoing between fans as to which one should get the priority to be remade first. Rumours are abound that 4 will get the remake treatment first, with Village serving as a testing ground for how Resident Evil 4 Remake could look. So let's discuss Resident Evil 4 first. Originally released back in 2005 for the GameCube and PS2 at first, before getting ported to countless consoles, handhelds, mobile devices and PC over a span of 15 years as of recording. We would see the series depart from the fixed camera angles and mostly abandon the survival horror elements that made the series famous. It was a welcome change, revitalising the series, while also stepping away from the main plot to stand on its own 2 feet, apart from a couple of characters and events that would link it back to the franchise. Seeing us take control of Leon Kennedy in rural Spain on a rescue mission to find the US President's daughter, while also dealing with a new parasitic infection which has taken root, and some occasional help with on and off romantic flame Ada Wong. Looking back at the original release, it has aged pretty well. It still holds up good with fans and is loved by many, but the muddy visuals and engaging controls are the main complaints that have caught up with some fans of the game, who are now calling for a remake. Now, if this hadn't been ported, upscaled and resold so much over the last 15 years, then it absolutely would warrant a remake. But the game feels like it still has some life left in it. Even the PC modding community have strived to improve the game to eke out as much life as they can. But then again, Capcom would most likely remake it sooner rather than later, since they most likely view Resident Evil 4 like Nikolai sees Jill in Resident Evil 3, licensed to print money. Let's move on to our next pair of games. Resident Evil Outbreak File 1 started life as a PS2 exclusive in 2003, with File 2 following suit in 2004, and would be the first pair of Resident Evil games to make use of online elements and online multiplayer as an option for the main campaign, at least until 5 and 6 took a stab at it years later. Outbreak would be set in parallel to the events of Resident Evil 2 and 3, following multiple characters to their attempt to escape Raccoon City. Even if players didn't have access to online features, they could use the built-in AI to play the game, with the other characters being controlled by the computer. But this wasn't exactly the best feature. Many fans clamour for its return, with some servers still running to accommodate players, or like myself, those who have arrived too late and decided to play the game almost 17 years later. The overall game is great, with new innovative enemy types, more new areas to explore in Raccoon City, and an engaging plot with a great group of characters. Many would love to see this remade, considering how far online play has come since 2004, making it much easier and accessible to everyone. But some would argue that we have had a spiritual remake in the form of Resident Evil Resistance. But even then, the game's ongoing development has at the time of recording been pulled by Capcom, barely 8 months after release, with no further updates since October. So this leaves a hole for Outbreak to fill, giving it a chance to break out back into the hearts of Resident Evil fans. But there is our final game, which not only I would personally love to see brought back, but so many others would too. In the year 2000, Code Veronica was released, but sadly it didn't get the best start, with it beginning as a Dreamcast exclusive, which sadly inhibited its potential until its exclusivity deal with Sega ended. Eventually it would flourish by being relaunched as Code Veronica X on the PS2 and the GameCube, with the story expanded to see more of Albert Wesker in his return since his absence after the first Resident Evil. Following on directly from Resident Evil 2, we follow Claire Redfield in her ongoing search for her brother Chris, but she ends up being incarcerated after breaking into the Umbrella HQ in Europe. Claire ends up involved in another outbreak on a remote island and partners up with fellow prisoner Steve Burnside, eventually leading to Chris Redfield getting involved in the events too. Code Veronica has a huge following, not only from its time on the Dreamcast, but also for those who, like me, played Code Veronica X and fell in love with it. The story was great, it brought so many loose ends together, it gave us Wesker back, it introduced us to the insane Ashford family and gave us new enemies that would be in our nightmares. It would be the first non-numbered main entry until the Revelations games came along, and also the first main entry to fully 3D environments and camera movement, which Capcom experimented previously with in the cult spin-off Dino Crisis. The locations would be haunting, and the story would lead us into the events of Resident Evil 4, but as a game it is slow and difficult. In my opinion, one of the hardest Resident Evil games I have ever played. Not just for the pace and the age of the game, but the gameplay was designed to have way more backtracking, and both main characters were played in a single run, rather than two separate campaigns like the first two games. And visually the game hasn't really aged too well. The FMVs are still okay, but the gameplay and in-game cutscenes feel a little flat and fogged up. This game did get a small remaster on the Xbox 360, but this would remain exclusive to Microsoft's console. It would also be one of the few games to not get a PC port along with Outbreak. To me, Code Veronica would benefit the most from an update with the R.E.T.I.N.A engine, not only visually, but gameplay-wise with the over-the-shoulder perspective, allowing for a Resident Evil 2 remake style of survival horror, but on a more wider scope. But I need to look at all these games objectively, and I have to say that out of all these great games, it should be Resident Evil Outbreak that should get the remake treatment first. Now, I am a huge Code Veronica fan, and have been ever since I first played it on the PS2 almost 19 years ago, and it would be at the top of my list for the best Resident Evil game I have ever played. But I have to bite my lip and admit that out of the 3 games on this list, Outbreak deserves it the most. 4 still has enough life left in it to be ported to the PS5, the Xbox One Series X, and the Switch to draw in fans both new and old. Code Veronica is still readily available as a download on consoles, and even though it hasn't really aged that well, it still is playable, and is the last semblance of the old tank controls and the fixed camera angles of the games that started it all. But Outbreak has the online elements and nostalgia for Raccoon City that gives it the edge. It's also one of the few games to not be ported or changed since its original release, which means it needs to be given the chance to explore a new fanbase. We have seen what Capcom can do with an original online experience with Resistance. Can you imagine what they could do with Outbreak File 1 and File 2? They could even use it as a way to link to the Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3 remakes, and answer questions that were not answered properly in those games. For example, the helicopter crash at the RPD, but you can also see my theory take on that one. They could also answer what happened to David Ford, and what was the fate of the other UBCS teams, and all the other little mysteries that we saw but never explained. They don't even have to make it a beat-for-beat remake. They could expand on it further by exploring unused concepts from 2 Remake and 3 Remake, like the life cycle of the Lickers, combining it with the Suspended from the Apple Inn, or looking at locations we never got to look at like the City Hall building to explore more about the political corruption in the council and Mayor Warren. The potential with Outbreak is huge, and while 4 being remade is inevitable, I don't see it being the biggest priority, and with Code Veronica I do so badly want to see it remade, but I'm not confident it could pull in the same numbers that 4 and Outbreak could, regardless of the love fans show it. And with Outbreak it gives players the online experience they have enjoyed in Resistance, but as part of a canon story, and back on the streets of the necropolis of Raccoon City. Thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed this video. Do you agree with my thoughts on the potential remakes of these games? Why not leave a comment below to discuss your theories and thoughts on what could be done. Please do remember to like and share this video on social media, and don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell to stay notified of new content. Thank you everybody, and I'll be seeing you again soon.